So we're going to revisit elements of linguistic racism, but through the lens of the most recent article that we read. Um, and so we're going to be drawing on discrimination that targets individuals on how they speak, and we'll be looking at international students in Australia. And this is based on the 2020 Dochin article, which looks at the psychological impacts of this racism, including depression, anxiety, and suicidal ideation. So let's go. So we went over this the last time, but a quick recap. Linguistic racism isn't just about language, it's about power. So it reflects how individuals are judged, marginalized, or excluded based on how their speech aligns or doesn't with a dominant linguistic standard. So this form of racism is often invisible, but it's very embedded in educational institutions, workplaces, and yes, even clinical settings. So for international students, a population I've done quite a bit of work with, uh, these judgments can shape, of course they can, of course they shape their academic and social well-being. So Dochin introduces two main forms of linguistic racism: ethnic accent bullying, which often manifests as laughing, mimicking, or isolating someone for their accent, and linguistic stereotyping, which occurs when people assume everyone cannot speak English well, regardless of their actual fluency because of how they look. So both forms have serious psychological effects, leading to internalized shame, identity confusion, and social withdrawal. So, of course, these are not just harming academically and socially, they're harming psychologically. So, many of Dochin's interviewees describe feelings of invisibility, low self worth, and an intense anxiety tied to how others perceive their English. So, these experiences, they don't go away even after someone becomes proficient in English. The trauma lingers, and we want to be attuned to these subtler forms of marginalization. So, Van's story reveals the pressure to assimilate linguistically. So, her classmates' laughter wasn't harmless, it drove her into depression and suicidal thoughts. And despite now sounding like quote unquote Australian, Van still carries an inferiority complex. So her experience tells us that linguistic racism has long-term mental health consequences, even when the speaker eventually, quote unquote, passes as fluent. Wang's experience reflects how racism operates regardless of actual language ability. So, despite speaking fluent English, he felt invisible and judged. So, the assumption that he must have a bad accent because he's Asian contributed to his depression. And this highlights the disconnect between linguistic ability and perceived credibility, a disconnect that can devastate someone's mental health. Ilhan's story is powerful because she's a native English speaker and still faces stereotyping. Okay, so her appearance overrides her language ability in others' eyes. Compliments like, your English is so good, may seem benign, but they reinforce the message, you're not expected to speak English well. So for Ilhan, this has led to anxiety in public spaces and feelings of not belonging anywhere. So this wasn't just a language study. I feel like it was a very complex human set of stories. Dochin's methodology emphasized how people express themselves and what emotional layers come through in their speech. So it's a reminder for us as clinicians how someone says something can be as important as what they say. So you want to pay attention to hesitation, tone, rhythm. All these things can reveal trauma, insecurity, or resilience. So these findings aren't just theoretical, right? They have real implications for how we engage with students, with clients. We want to decolonize our notions of quote unquote good English. Um, in counseling, it may be appropriate to ask if clients, it may be appropriate, you got to just scope it out, to ask clients if they've ever felt ashamed of how they speak or been treated differently because of language. So, as per usual, our job is not to correct, but just to affirm and understand. So, to conclude from the article, linguistic racism is a subtle but destructive force because it strips people of their confidence and dignity. And in our line of work, we're gatekeepers oftentimes to belonging. So we want to move toward that more expansive, inclusive vision of communication, one that affirms rather than erases. So the goal isn't assimilation, it's acceptance.